All right, we have a couple of people. Let me unveil myself here. Hi, everybody. Oh, and we have Kevin. Kevin and I, we exchanged emails this week, right? Okay, now if people want to talk to me, I have to open up the chat. There it is. Yes, yes. Okay. So let's see if we can get started because my opinion is we don't have a moment to lose in this class. So other people will be joining us, but we don't have a moment to lose. Now, what I was thinking is I like to start the sessions with math because most people don't like math too much. And so it's good. Have you ever heard the expression do the worst first? So we do the part that is probably the most time consuming and maybe high and maybe the most stressful first, and then we can get that out of the way. Now, what I want to tell you is that I've had some students who take the state test and say there were no math questions on the state test. Well, that's impossible. There are some math questions on the state test, but sometimes the math questions are so easy that they don't notice them. So I'm going to give you an example of a math question that is the same question on both the school test and the state test. Now, that happens pretty often. And the reason why it happens pretty often is that almost every school in the state is going to try to make their school test as much like the state test as possible. Because, I mean, what are you going to do? Aren't you going to try to imitate what your bosses do? So if our bosses at Department of State think that something is important, then we got to think it's important too. Hello to the newcomers. So we are starting, those of you who just arrived, you're not late. We're starting on our first question now. So a married couple bought a home for 250,000 and sold it 10 years later for 350,000. How much capital gain is not taxed? So their capital gain is their profit, right? So capital gain is profit. They made $100,000, right? On income tax, we are taxed on profit, uh, called capital gains tax. But there is a special rule for real estate. So does anybody remember the special rule and what's going to happen to this couple? So they made, yes, exactly right. So Peter is pointing out to us that if a married couple has capital gains less than 500,000 on sale of their primary home, no income tax on those capital gains. So their profit was 100,000. So the answer is that 100,000 of their capital gains will not be taxed. Pretty easy, right? So if you can remember that rule, then you don't need a calculator or anything for this question. Oh, you know what RELNY is giving me right now? Um, I've taught for a lot of schools, and Kevin knows this because when Kevin wrote me, I got mixed up as to which school he might be asking me about. I had to ask him, which school are you going to? So RELNY is by far the best school that I ever taught for. And I went online and gave a review but that was a long time ago. So before class this evening, I wrote them and I said, look, is there someplace else that I can give RELNY a review? And they just answered my question. They said, here's the link you asked for on WhatsApp for reviews. No, it's not. It's not your fault. You probably assumed that I only taught for one place. So, I can only write one review. So if the rest of you like RELNY as much as I do, maybe you could go to this link as well and write a nice review for them. Because as soon as class is over tonight, I'm going to go there and write them a good review because this school, I have really enjoyed teaching here. So getting back to the question, you're going to find that sometimes there are math questions that don't even require a calculator. Sometimes what they'll do is ask you about an equation. Now, right now, the questions that I'm giving you are questions from the school test. By the way, do you notice that I'm talking real fast? The reason that I talk real fast in the review sessions is that I feel that every minute is precious and we want to get as much information in as we can. So I have a tendency to talk real fast. If I'm talking too fast, just tell me to slow down and I will. All right. Now, these questions that I'm giving you right now, you will see on both the school test and the state test. So here's an example of a question that it's a math question, but it doesn't have any numbers in it. So here's the question. I'm going to give you the answers, and then I'm going to give you the link that RELNY gave me for writing reviews. So I'm going to give you the 4 choices. How is the real estate salesperson student schedule the state exam for a real estate license? I'll be delighted to answer that in just a minute, okay? All right, so let me give you choices. Both the school test and the state test are multiple choice. And as I said earlier, schools in New York State try to make the school test as much like the state test as they can. So, what is the word for the difference between rentable square feet and usable square feet? Efficiency factor, expense stop, loss factor, or operating expenses? And you can call out the answer, you can unmute yourself and call out the answer, or you can type the answer into the chat, whichever you prefer. Oh, okay. Now, Peter, if you're having trouble scheduling the school test, that I don't know about because all I do is teach around here. I don't know the administrative stuff, but let me just type this for the benefit of everyone. If you are having trouble scheduling the school test, um, please inform Deb at relny.com. Everybody knows Deb, right? Deb is in charge of customer service. And if you are feeling uncomfortable about it's trying to sell you something, which isn't really the way RELNY is, you should inform Deb. Okay, Jennifer is absolutely correct. The answer is loss factor. And here's why. The rentable square feet is the whole place. Usable is the part of the office that can be used for the tenant's business. So it doesn't include loss space, like closets, halls, bathrooms, stairs, lobby, etc. So rentable square feet minus loss square feet equals usable square feet. Okay. So Peter, did I answer your question? Um, can you email Deb and get it straightened out? Okay, and if you are uncomfortable about it, be sure to tell her. Because, you know, RELNY really tries to please the students in every way that they can. Let me give you, now here's the link that RELNY gave me because I asked them how I could write a review for their school. And they gave me this link, which I'm going to share with you. So if you want to write a review about RELNY, here it is. Okay. Now, someone asked me how to schedule the state exam. You schedule a state exam by going to New York State eaccessny.com. Okay, and you create an account, which, you know, kind of means that you register, right? And then you can reserve a spot to take the exam. And they have various different places you can take it. Like some people live in New York City, some people live in Syracuse, whatever, wherever it is that you happen to live, Franklin Square, whatever, they have exam sites where you can go. And please allow at least 2 to 3 weeks before you want to take the test, because they usually have a waiting list. Like you can't sign up like the day before or something like that. Now, the reason why I'm writing down everything that I say is that at the end of the class, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a copy of everything that I have written in the chat, which will include all the questions and answers, and I'm going to email it to everybody who took this webinar with me tonight. So that way you have notes to study from. All right? So what we are doing is we're going to start out the class by doing a few math questions. And then after that, we'll go into all different types of questions. Now, some students are taking the class after one chapter. Some students are taking the class after 19 chapters. So, oh golly, I have so many questions here. I will answer them all. All right. So if you have taken all the chapters, then, you know, you can answer all the questions that I give. If you have only taken one chapter, don't worry, because my attitude is it doesn't matter how many chapters you've covered. You have to learn the material sometime. So you can learn it before the webinar or you can learn it during the webinar. It doesn't matter. As long as you learn the material at some point, you're good. So before I give you the next question, I want to answer what people are asking me. How long is the real estate exam valid? All right, the school test, I believe, is valid for 8 years. And the state test, you know what? If you'll forgive me for just 1 minute, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the information straight from Department of State, and I have it saved on my desktop. That's how important it is, and that's how many times I get requests about this. Okay, so I have here New York State Department of State rules for license renewal. Now, here's a quote from Department of State, and it says, if you do not renew your license, you cannot conduct any real estate activities that require a New York State real estate license. But I don't think that is what the person is asking. I think what you're asking is if you pass the New York State test, but you don't get a license, how long is the New York test good for? Is that the question? I think that's the question, so I'm going to give it to you here. This comes from frequently asked questions from Department of State. Yes, exactly right. Okay, so here's what I think is going to answer your question. So the person is asking, once I pass the school exam, how long is it valid for New York State? Um, okay, so the school is valid for 8 years. The state test is valid for 2, and that's what I thought I was copying a moment ago. Let me get it for you. Uh, The answer is 2, but I'm trying to find the quote from Department of State. Well, you know what? I'm not going to hold up the class. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get that answer for you, and I'm going to include it in the transcript that I send tonight, okay? Because I don't want everybody to wait while I find the exact quote from Department of State. So, I'm going to say New York State test good for 2 years, and I'll put that information into the transcript when I send it. Okay, now someone else, the school test is good for 8 years, but the state test, I believe, is good for 2. Can you explain this question? A property sells for 900. The commission is 5% on the first 500,000 and 4% above that. How much does the broker get paid? Sure. Kevin, that is a question on the state test. So I'm glad that you brought that up because that's something that everybody probably wants to know. So let's see if we can do it together. Now, this is called a graduated commission. And you see graduated commissions in very expensive properties. For example, you see it a lot in commercial properties. You also see it in very high-end residential properties, like when people are selling homes for more than $10 million. All right. So $900,000 doesn't sound like a lot of money, but we have to remember that Department of State wrote most of the questions on the test 40 years ago in Albany. So even today, $900,000 is a lot of money for a property in upstate New York. It's not very much money for a property in New York City because we just have different real estate markets, different micro markets in those two areas. Okay, so um, the commission is 5% on the first 500. So $500,000 times 5%. That means that the broker is going to make what, 25,000? Am I right? I didn't pull my calculator out. Uh, Partial commission. Okay. Now, the sale price was 900,000. So $400,000 of the sale price, the person hasn't been paid for yet. So 400,000, which is the balance of the sale price, the amount of the sale price that's left, times 4% commission equals, what's that going to be, 16,000? Okay, then we add the two partial commissions together to get total commission. So 25,000 plus 16,000. And Andrew is a little too smart to be in this class. I always joke around. I say that if you're too smart, I kick you out of the class. I'm just kidding. I like the people that are ahead of me. Okay, so Andrew is absolutely right. The total commission is $41,000. So does that make sense? Did I explain that? Oh, and Jennifer's got it too. So did I explain that well enough? All right. The next one that I was going to give you was a good old IRV question. And IRV is discussed in chapter 16. Chapter 16 is commercial. So if you haven't taken chapter 16 yet, you're going to learn this now. A building has 20 apartments renting for $750 a month. Cap rate in the area for that product is 6.5%. What is the value? I promise you, there's an IRV question on the school test. You took chapter 16 for a week? Is that what you're saying? Because chapter 16 is a long one. I think it's 10 hours. Uh, yeah, chapter 16 is a killer. Um, I promise you there's an IRV question on the school test and the state test. Now, the idea behind it is this for people who've not taken chapter 16 yet. The value of a commercial building is based on its income. Because if I asked you to buy a house, you would want to know what it looks like or where it is. But if I asked you to buy a commercial building, the only thing you would want to know is, if I buy this building, how much money will I make? You don't care what it looks like. You don't care where it is. You care, if you buy it, how much money are you going to make? Because you're not going to live there. So the whole idea of a commercial building is, if it has high income, high value, low income, low value. So in a commercial sale, the buyer knows how much income the building makes because the seller shares their operating statement with the buyer. And the operating statement shows gross income, minus expenses equals net operating income, which if you're cool, you call it NOI. Now, NOI is the most important number you ever want to know about a commercial building. NOI is the most important number to know about a commercial building. So, to find the value of a building based on income, you use ERV. And ERV is income, and ERV is always net income. ERV is always net operating income. So income divided by rate of return equals value. Because if you think about it, the seller of the building, they can ask for any price they want. They can ask for $600 million for a building if they want to, but the building is only worth as much as the income that it makes justifies. Now, rate of return, all right? Whenever you make an investment, you get a percentage return. So, for example, one day I was walking down the street and I saw two banks next to each other, and each bank had a poster in the window. And one poster said, savings account rate of return 0.9%. And the other bank had a sign that said rate of return 0.3%. So anytime you do an investment, it has a rate of return. Usually the rate of return goes up and down with the market. And real estate has a rate of return too. So the rate of return that investors are getting in a certain real estate market for a certain type of building is called the capitalization rate, or cap rate if you're cool. Now, you can find the cap rate by reading magazines, doing online research, or asking a knowledgeable professional. So when I was writing this course and I wanted to know, like, I didn't know what the cap rate on an office building was in suburban Buffalo. So I looked it up. I looked online and I read a whole bunch of listings for properties for sale and figured out what an average capitalization rate was in suburban Buffalo for, an office building in good condition. All right. So now let's go back to the question now that we understand all this. So first we have to figure out the income of the building. Okay. Now they don't tell us the net income, so we're just going to have to use we're just going to have to assume that it's net. All right. So what are they telling us here in the question? I'm going to repeat the question again for you. All right, the building has 20 apartments renting for $750 per month. So 20 apartments times 750 rent per month times 12 months. Why? Because it's always annual. So when you're doing math equations, always assume they're annual, unless they tell you otherwise. All right, times 12 months equals. Now, Jennifer's already done it for us. And the answer is 180,000, right? And then Jennifer's going to use IRV. I divided by R equals V. So 180,000 income divided by 6.5% rate of return equals the value. And what is the value going to be? I can't see what Jennifer wrote anymore. I'm sure she had it right though. 180,000 divided by let's see. 2,769,000. Was that the answer? I'm not going to put in the dollars. Let me see if that was the answer that Jennifer had. Yes, Jennifer had the same answer I did. So what is the answer on the test? Okay. Jennifer and I both got exactly the same answer, 2,769,000. Now, people who have not taken the commercial math chapter, you might look at this and go, wait a second. I thought when you divided by something, it got smaller. How come you divided by something and got something that was bigger? All right. The reason why is because when you divide by a really small number, you get a bigger answer than if you divide by a bigger number. So let me give you an example. Which is a bigger number? 1/2, 1 divided by 2, 1/8, 1 divided by 8, by 8, or 1/122nd, 1 divided by 122. Which is the biggest number? The biggest number is 1/2, right? No, hang on. If I took 1 and divided by 2, I get 0.5. But if I take 1 and I divide by 122, I get 0.008, which is a lot less than 0.5. So the smaller the number that I'm dividing by, the bigger the number I wind up with. It's kind of like if I had a pizza. If I'm dividing the pizza into 2 parts, I'm going to have much bigger parts than if I'm dividing the pizza into 30 parts. If I'm dividing the pizza into 30 parts, each slice of pizza is going to be real, real tiny. So the smaller the number I'm dividing by, the bigger the pieces are going to be. Okay, so that's why when you divide by a really small number, and 6.5% is 0.065. That's why you end up with a really big number. Okay, so did I explain that clearly enough for everybody? Because I don't like to move on until everybody is comfortable. All right. Before we end the subject of math, I would like to point out that sometimes you will have math questions that ask you about they ask you about an equation and they don't have any numbers in them. So I'm going to give you an example. What are you deriving? This is on both the school test and the state test. When you take a building's effective gross income and subtract annual operating expenses. And if you want choices, tell me, but I think you can guess this without choices. Exactly right. I'll give you choices anyway. There are your choices. Cash on cash return, debt service, NOI, or after-tax cash flow. So the answer everybody has established, answer is C. Okay, very good. Now, what I said to the school today, they were reminding me that I had to teach today. And I said to them, do you have any suggestions of what I ought to talk about? And they said, Kristen, be sure that you talk about fair housing. And they're absolutely right, because the last time that I took the test, for legal reasons, I had to take the test in February of 2024. And I counted, I'll answer that in a second. I counted 15 math questions. Out of 75 questions, there were 15 math questions. And not math, 15 fair housing questions. So fair housing is far and away the most important topic on the test. So the school said to me, Kristen, please concentrate on fair housing when you do the webinar tonight. Okay, now Kevin is asking, is it true that 30% of the questions on the state exam are math related? Absolutely not. What they do on the state test, it's very interesting, is they seem to put all the math questions at the end, which is a bad thing for people who don't like math, because the people who don't like math, they're going through the test, oh, la dee da, they're going through the test, marking the answers, and then they get to the last page of the test, and whoa, there's all the math questions. And like maybe they're running out of time, and the math questions might take them more time. So people who don't like math or who take a long time to calculate the math questions, they should go to the last page of the exam first and knock out the math questions. There's usually anywhere between 2 and 4 math questions on the state test. Now, let's take the worst case possibility. Let's say that there are 4 math questions. 4 out of 75 is only 5%. So only 5% of the test, worst case, is going to be math. Jennifer asks, how often do they switch the test? Is there an A, and B test, or just one type of exam? Okay, there are about 6 different exams, and they number the exams. So there's exam 733 and 866 and 649, and they number the tests. And when you go in to take the test, by the way, the state test is done on paper, which I'm kind of glad, because like people can hack into a computer system, but old-fashioned 20th century paper still remains quite secure. So for security reasons, New York State still does it on paper, while other states do their testing on computer. Now, when you fill out, like you have to, they give you the number 2 pencil and everything, you're not allowed to bring your own pencil. When they give you the number 2 pencil and you blacken in the little dots and everything, what they do is they make you blacken in the dots for your name and blacken in the dots for which test number you took. So that way you know which number test you had. And how often do they switch the state exam? Almost never. I first took the state exam about 40 years ago when I first got my license. And I took it again, as I say, last year. And a lot of the questions were the same. Now, in my career, I think I've taken the test maybe about 5 times. And every single time I take it, it's the same questions. Uh, I've had, I've taught at a lot of different schools, and I've had 100,000 students. My students go downtown, they take the test, they email me what the questions were. And year after year after year, it's all the same questions. Now, the Department of State does change the test when the law changes. Like, I'll give you an example. There used to be a question of what is the money limit for small claims court. Well, the money limit for small claims court went up. It used to be $5,000. Now it's $10,000 in New York City. So they had to change the test, right? Because if the law changes, then the answer is no longer correct and they have to change the test. So if the law changes, they will change the test. Another thing they did is they took some of the old questions that they had and got rid of them and substituted fair housing questions that they already had. And they also wrote a couple of new questions about implicit bias and cultural competence. All right. So, speaking of which, I think I should probably do that with you now. Okay. I think I should give you the one of the new questions that they have written. See, I think that Department of State likes it when a teacher like me pays attention to what's on the test. Because what is Department of State going to do? Are they going to put stuff on the test that they don't think is important? Or are they going to put on the test stuff that they think is important for you to know? So, what I'm supposed to do as a teacher is be sure that you know the stuff that Department of State considers important enough to test you on. And what they consider important enough to test you on is fair housing. So let's do this one. Did I answer your question, Jennifer? I think the reason they don't change the test very much is twofold. One is that our real estate system started 2,000 years ago, and it doesn't really change that much. An easement is still an easement. A escheat is still a escheat. A contract is still a contract. So our real estate system doesn't really, a deed is still a deed. So, oh, did I forget your question? I'm sorry. Anyway, our real estate system doesn't change that much. Here we go. I found you. I thought I answered it. Oh, I didn't even see this question. I didn't forget it. I didn't even see it. We have studied residential real estate and commercial real estate. Which one would you recommend us for choice of career? Um, we already know that the real estate salesperson is commission-based activity, since commercial real estate is different from residential. Okay, there are a few criteria. One is that residential is easier to break into. Like if you start doing residential rentals, you can start making money like in the first month or two. And you can do a lot more deals in a year. Now, when I went into commercial real estate, I did 0 deals in my first year. It took me 1 entire year before I did my first deal. So you kind of have to be able to have money saved up, in case you don't start making money right away. And the reason for that is that commercial deals have a very long sales cycle. And it takes a long time to do a commercial deal. Like if you're going to sell a great big office building, or you're going to sell a great big apartment building or a shopping center or something, like those deals take a really long time to do. They could take like 9 months, or if you have complications, they could even take, 2 years or something. So commercial has a very long sales cycle. commercial deals also tend to fall through more often than residential. But I didn't earn a single thing for a year, but commercial deals pay more. So at the end of my first year, like I was like really worried and everything, but at the end of my first year, I got a check for $150,000. So, it's worth it if you can stay in it. Now, what some people do is they say, well, I don't really want to go into residential. I really want to go into commercial, but I think I'll go into residential first and learn the industry and then move over to commercial. And I don't think that's such a good idea. And the reason why is that you go into residential and you learn everything that you need to know. You learn all the procedures and all the laws. And most importantly, you get to know all the buildings and all the people. You get to know the property managers. You get to know the other people in the industry that you're doing business with. You get to know all the landlords. You get to know all the builders. So you really you get to know the inventory. You learn everything about the industry, and now you're going to take all that knowledge and all those valuable contacts and throw them away and start over again in another industry. It's kind of like saying, I really want to learn the piano, but I think I'll learn the violin first. And you learn the violin, you get really good at the violin, then you throw it away. Like, okay, now I'm going to start on the piano. It kind of is not the most efficient way to do it. So I tell students that you should aim to do what it is you really want to do first, because like when I did it the wrong way. Like I started out in residential and moved over to commercial. And when I moved over to commercial, like in residential, I thought I really knew what I was doing. And then I moved over to commercial and I was like a child again. And I was 40 years old, so I wasn't a child, but like I didn't know anything. And I was so innocent and so ignorant, and here I was asking really dumb questions and making stupid mistakes. And, it was frustrating. And I wished that I had started out in commercial, which is where I had really wanted to be. So I always counsel people, start out where it is you really want to go. And that way you can build your knowledge and your expertise and your contacts. And, you'll get people who trust you in the industry and you'll get a reputation in the industry and all of that. Now, that being said, another thing that I would say to you is that if you're going to do commercial has a lot of math. And commercials very cut and dried, like it involves a lot of reading of contracts, doing a lot of like reading spreadsheets and reading pro formas and things like that. So like you have to have a lot of ability to tolerate reading like dry reports. Now, my personality is I do a lot better with dry reports because I'm not like a very domestic person. So in residential, like I just can't get excited about a kitchen. And so or I can't get excited about a garden or something. So it's very hard for me it's not my personality, so it's very hard for me to work in that area. But I love reading contracts and financial documents. So it depends largely, I think, also on your personality. Also, they say that commercial has a reputation for being a lot more competitive. Um, yeah, they say that residential is easy, but residential is also competitive. But yes, you are absolutely correct, Kevin, that you earn money faster in residential than commercial, because commercial, it takes a long time to learn the industry, and commercial deals have a long sales cycle. So, Lucian, did I answer your question now? I hope. What I would do if I were you is um, RELNY, I believe that RELNY has contacts with a lot of brokers in the industry, and you can go and meet with a commercial broker and ask them the very same question that you're asking me. because they're probably going to give you a different answer than I did. Not that my answer is wrong, but just that everybody has a different perspective and everybody will will give a different approach to the question. And when you ask them questions in interviews, you'll get a lot of insight. And like you can go to an interview and you can say, look, if I were to come into commercial and join a company like yours, what would a typical day be like for me? And you can find out a lot just by going on interviews. And I always tell my students that before you decide to associate with a broker, please try to go on as many interviews as you can, because you'll learn so much by going on the interviews. And also, people think, oh, like all the brokerages are the same, but they really aren't. Like, the brokerages have different cultures, they have different business models, they have different commission structures. They have different attributes. You know, they have different strengths and weaknesses. So I would say to interview with as many companies as possible, and that way you find the best place for yourself. Because the sooner you find the best company to work at, the better off you're going to be in your career. So that's what I would say. All right. So are we ready to get back to fair housing? Okay. So this is the new fair housing question that Department of State just wrote. What is it called when an action by a housing provider can adversely affect members of protected groups? Now, you might not know the answer to this, but it's very easy to rule out the wrong ones. Now, I often say that if you see a question, and by the way, if you do know the answer, feel free to shout it out or put it in the text. All right. Uh, if you see a question and you have absolutely no idea what the answer is, if you guess 1 out of 4, you have a 25% chance of getting the answer right. If you can eliminate one of the stupid answers, one of the stupid choices, you have a 33% of getting it right. If you can eliminate another one of the stupid choices, now you have a 50% chance of getting it right. So the more that you can eliminate the obviously wrong choices, the more likely you are to get the question right. So contingent, yeah, subordination. Subordination is always wrong. You might remember me saying that in the class. Subordination's always wrong. I have never seen Peter is absolutely right. It is disparate impact. So I've never seen a question where subordination is wrong. Now, just using this approach, so we've eliminated subordination. Contingency. Does anybody remember what a contingency is? A contingency is a clause in a sale contract that says if a condition is not met, buyer can back out of the sale and get their deposit back. Okay. The most common contingency is for a mortgage. If buyer can't get a mortgage, they can back out. So contingency has nothing to do with fair housing, does it? If a student failed the state exam, can they take it again? Yes. They can take it as many times as they like until they run out of $15. Okay, so and plus also we said earlier, there's only about 6 versions of the state test. So it's a good idea. Like, I mean, probably you're going to pass, but when you take the state test, come out and do what I call a brain dump, which is bring some paper with you and jot down all the questions that you remember that you were unsure about. And that way, if God forbid you should fail, you can look up the questions that you were unsure about and get the right answers. Because when you go back, even if you don't get the same version of the test again, you may get those questions again. And the next time you'll get them right. So you can take state test as many times as you like. Okay, so contingency is wrong. And cultural competence, well, if they're adversely affecting protected groups, that's definitely not cultural competence, is it? So it has to be disparate impact. So even if you don't know what disparate impact is, you can reason it out by excluding the obviously wrong choices. So disparate impact means that a housing provider, like a landlord, co-op, co-op board, manager, etc., does something legal, but it indirectly affects a protected group under fair housing, which makes it illegal. An example is a landlord who refuses to allow anyone who has ever been convicted of a crime to see apartments or apply for tenancy. That in itself is not illegal, except in New York City. Okay, but who statistically is most likely to be convicted of a crime? Young, so that would be age. Minority, so that would be like race or religion or something. Males, and that would be gender, right? So indirectly, the landlord is discriminating against 3 protected groups. To stay within the law, the landlord must let everyone look at and apply for an apartment. If a landlord can only refuse the person if can only refuse a specific if they have a good reason that doesn't violate fair housing law. Okay, so did I explain that well enough? If I didn't explain it well enough, I'll give another example. You have to let me know. what I'm doing now is I am giving you questions that students reported to me were on the state test. Okay, here's the example I'm going to give you. Uh, disparate impact is an idea that was invented by US Supreme Court. And what happened was there was a company in a poor area of North Carolina, and they had a job opening. And they said, well, we don't want to hire people from the outside world. We want to promote employees who already work for the company. So they put together a description of the job. And they said, well, the person needs good management skills, and they have to have a high school education, and they have to have like a good work record, and they have to have been with the company for at least 5 years and stuff like that, right? So this one guy had all that stuff and he applied for the job, but the company turned him down. They didn't give him the promotion because he didn't finish high school. And the guy said, well, the reason I didn't finish high school was because my father died and somebody had to go to work to support the family, and I was the oldest kid. And they said, well, we don't care. The job description says you need a high school degree. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the guy went to the Supreme Court and he said, look, this is a poor county. And in this county, 36% of minority students drop out of high school, but only 10% of white students drop out of high school. And there's not one thing that people learn in high school that has anything to do with this job. So, although it's not illegal to say that you need a high school education to take a job, in this case, it was indirectly discriminating against minorities because minorities had financial problems and couldn't finish high school. And so the Supreme Court came up with the idea that this guy should get the promotion because the guy had a fantastic work record and he'd been with the company a long time and everybody loved him and he was qualified for the job. He just didn't finish high school. And so the Supreme Court said that the guy should get promoted because the company was indirectly discriminating against minorities who were less likely to finish high school for financial reasons. So the idea of disparate impact is also used in real estate. So I hope I said that a little better the second time. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you another question that you are likely to see on the state test. Santiago is a broker who shows homes to Latino buyers in mostly Latino areas. This is steering, blockbusting, redlining, or filtering. Thank you. Absolutely right. Thank you, Jennifer. Answer is steering. All right. Does everybody remember what steering, blockbusting, and redlining are, or would you like me to refresh your memory? And remember, you can always unmute yourself and talk if you want to as well. Okay, I've got more for you. You're going to see similar or the same questions on both the school and the state test. Because I told you at the beginning of the class that um, that schools like their test to be as much like the state as possible. Okay, now the best way to remember steering, blockbusting, and redlining, I think, is to remember them visually. Because steering is like steering a car, where you take people to areas based on what their um, ethnic group is. Like, for example, you jump in a Uber and you say, steer this Chinese guy to Chinatown, or steer this Italian guy to Little Italy. So steering is showing real estate to people in only certain areas because of their ethnic group or religion or other protected status. Okay. And it comes from steering a car to a certain place. Okay. Block busting is busting up the block. It's destroying a neighborhood. And it's destroying a neighborhood by trying to scare people to sell for discrimination reasons. So, for example, this actually happened to me when I was a little kid. Um, my family lived in a community where pretty much all the families were white, and there was this real estate broker, and he moved in a black family to the neighborhood. And then he knocked on everybody's door and said, "Oh, look at this. The minorities are moving into the neighborhood, so you should sell your apartment now. Or not your apartment, your house. You should sell your house now." So he was trying to scare people for racist reasons to sell their house. And that would have destroyed the neighborhood. Like in the neighborhood, everybody knew each other and played together and everything. So my parents, like I was a little kid at the time, and my parents got together. Is it illegal if the client asks you? Yes, but we'll get to that in a second. Um, the um, I forget what I was going to say about blockbusting. Oh yeah, my parents got together with the other families in the area and reported this broker to Department of State. I don't know what Department of State did to him, but they probably took his license away. Anyway, so interestingly, I can tell you what ended up happening is the family that moved into the neighborhood, they had a boy and a girl who were my age. They were twins and they were my age. And I don't know what happened to the girl, but the boy grew up to become the school principal in like the same school that we went to. It was funny. Okay, but anyway, so block busting is destroying a neighborhood by trying to scare owners to sell for discrimination reasons. So you're busting up the block. And then the last one, redlining, is when banks, redlining is for banks, refuse to lend mortgages in minority areas. This is illegal because banks are supposed to approve mortgages based on the financial um, qualifications of the borrower, not the neighborhood where they want to live. Okay. And redlining actually comes from the idea that banks would hang a map on the wall and they'd take a red pen and they would draw lines and go like, we land here, not here, here, not here, and so forth. So I don't mean to laugh. It's just it seems like a ridiculous thing to do nowadays. People still do it, but it seems ridiculous. So banks would hang maps on the wall and draw red lines where they would not lend money. Okay, so steering is steering a car to certain areas. Blockbusting is destroying the neighborhood by scaring people to leave. And redlining is putting the map on the wall and drawing the red lines where you won't lend. Okay, so I think if you remember it visually, it's easier to remember. Now, Jennifer made an interesting point. Is it illegal if the client asks you to only show homes that are predominantly within their culture? Well, first and foremost, do you know something? In all my years in residential real estate, that has never happened to me. And the reason it hasn't happened to me is that people usually know where the synagogue is, or where the Islamic temple is, or they know where their cousin lives, or something like that. And if they have absolutely no idea, we have a saying in the industry, which is we are not tour guides. Because what ends up happening is you end up taking a person, like I happen to live in New York City, so I talk about New York City, but it could happen anywhere. And you end up taking a person on a tour of the city, and you spend like a week, giving them a free tour of the city, and then they wind up buying a property from some other broker. So it's not a good idea to be a tour guide. So if somebody absolutely doesn't know, you can say to them, well, why don't you go to this neighborhood or check out that neighborhood or go to this museum, or where is your job going to be? Why don't you be on the same bus line with your job or something like that? Um, the really scary thing about this is that they could be a tester. Okay, testers are sent by um, Department of State and also by private civil rights groups. And our state government recently announced that they had allocated more money for more testers. So that is a classic thing that a tester would do. A tester would come to you and a tester would say, I'm Jewish. I want you to take me to neighborhoods where Jewish people live. And if you agree to do that, that's steering. And you and your broker, I'm not saying you would do it, but a salesperson and their broker could get in trouble for that. So I wouldn't do it. Now, what you can do is you can give somebody demographic information and you can say, look, I'm not here to judge what neighborhood is what. City Council releases demographic information. Here's the address of New York City Council. And if you live in Buffalo, here's the address of Buffalo City Council. They release demographic information. You can read it for yourself. That's the most I would do. Yeah, but people know very rapidly how they feel. You can take them to certain areas and say, do you feel comfortable here? Is this an area you would like to explore a little more? They know. People usually know where they want to be. Okay, let's keep going if you don't mind. I have more questions for you. Here comes another one. The illegal practice of trying to induce panic selling in a neighborhood because of the entry of a certain racial, religious, or ethnic group. Steering, antitrust, redlining, or blockbusting. Thank you. Answer is D. Now, on the test, they will try to confuse you about the difference between Sherman Act, Sherman Antitrust Act, which outlaws price fixing, and fair housing laws. Sherman Act has nothing to do with fair housing. But see, what happens is they ask you a question and they need four choices, right? So they go, steering, blockbusting, red line. Oh no, we need another one. Let's do antitrust. So don't let them fool you. Or they'll say, let's see, we've got Civil Rights Act, Fair Housing Act, Equal Opportunity Act. We need another one. How about the Sherman Act? So don't let them fool you with that. Now, I'm going to give you a fair housing question that I got wrong. We're going to find out if you're smarter than I am, okay? Which one of the following laws was the first attempt by the federal government to guarantee equal borrowing opportunities to all U.S. citizens? Civil Rights Act of 1866, Real Estate Law of 1922. You know what that is? That's license law. That's Article 12A, 1922. Um, Federal Fair Housing Act of 1968 or Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act of 1975. That's RESPA. Okay, well, I'll give you a hint, okay? I got it wrong. I chose Civil Rights Act, and I was completely wrong. So I chose um, Civil Rights Act, and I was wrong. Jennifer, you are dangerously close to getting kicked out of the class for being too smart. I'm just kidding. I always joke around. I say if you're too smart, I kick you out. But Jennifer's getting them all right. This is great. Oh, everybody got it right. Okay, beautiful. So that is absolutely right. So 1968 Fair Housing Act is the answer. Great. All right, so everybody's better than I am. Um, Let me tell you why I got it wrong. Because Civil Rights Act gives equal rights in real estate to do like just about everything that you can do, to inherit, to farm, to sell, to lease, to sue, to mortgage, well, it doesn't mention banks. It doesn't mention mortgages. That's the only thing it doesn't mention. So Civil Rights Act, the one thing it doesn't mention, Civil Rights Act of 1866 doesn't mention banks or mortgages. That's where I got wrong. So it's not until 1968. And the reason is that back in 1866, mortgages were not like a really big thing the way they are today. Yeah, it's hard to remember dates. But see, Civil Rights Act, you can remember because US Civil War, uh, which ended slavery, was over in 1865. So all these free people needed real estate rights. I mean, you can't just go, okay, now you're free. And they're like, oh, all right, but like, where do we get a farm? Where do we get a house? They can't just be free. They have to have real estate rights as well. So 1865 was right after, I'm sorry, right before 1866. So the law came right after the Civil War. Okay, so that one is pretty easy to remember. And slavery, of course, was about race. So 1866 Civil Rights Act gave everybody equal rights in real estate, regardless of race. And that leads me to another question that is always on the test. Which fair housing law has no exceptions or exemptions ever? I'm not even going to give you choices. I want you to just tell me the answer. Which fair housing law has no exceptions or exemptions ever? Okay, well, we know that there are some exceptions to fair housing law. Like, for example, can you have senior care where people aren't allowed to live there unless they're 55 years old? Well, I mean, that does kind of violate age protection, but it's an exception. Or like, can you have a college dorm that's like for girls only? Yes, you can. I mean, it's kind of a violation of the exception for gender, but it's okay. It's an exception. It's legally an exception. Which fair housing law has no exceptions or exemptions ever? Well, Jennifer is absolutely right. 1866 Civil Rights Act for race. Okay. Who would be? I'm starting to get to the end. I'm starting to get to the end of fair housing, okay? I'll do this in a second, Kevin. Who would be most likely to get a fair, to get an exemption to fair housing law? Um, who would be most likely to get an exemption to fair housing law? A person looking for a roommate, a landlord, a broker, or a website? Thank you. Absolutely right. The answer is roommate. Because think about it this way. Let's say that I am looking for a roommate. That means I'm looking for someone to share my kitchen, my bathroom, my living room, my dining room, whatever. They're going to share my whole house with me except my bedroom, right? So, can I say I want a roommate with no kids? Well, yeah, but that violates family status, doesn't it? Can I say I want a female roommate? Well, yeah, but that violates gender, doesn't it? Can I say I'm allergic to service animals, so I want a roommate who doesn't have a service dog? Well, yeah, but that violates ADA, doesn't it? See what I'm saying? So they're going to give me a break with those things because I'm looking for someone to share my personal home. But if I'm a landlord, I don't get those exemptions. If I'm a broker, no, absolutely not. If I'm a website, I can't advertise like apartment for rent, no service dogs. Like, that's an excellent way to get your website shut down, right? So there you go. Okay. Now the question is, can I explain? Base rent is 9,000 a month with 7.5% overage. If annual gross sales are 1.2 million, what will be total rent this year? All right, where did you get that question from? Okay. Um, the reason that I say that is that there are no questions like that on the school test or the state test. But I think you know by now how I am, that I always answer questions. So what I will do is I will answer that question for you, but I will do it um, in the transcript. Okay, because I don't want to take class time, like, we're studying for the school test and the state test, and I don't want to take class time talking about something that's not on the test, but I do want to answer your question. So what I will do is I will answer your question in the transcript, and that way everybody can benefit from the answer, like everybody can benefit from the knowledge, but we won't take time away from our studying. Now, um, I noticed that the time is 7:26. How long is this class supposed to last? Like, I'm so stupid, I don't even know how long the class is supposed to last. Does anybody know? I think the class is supposed to be only like an hour or maybe an hour and a half, but I get so excited about this that I usually keep going. So if you have to leave, just be sure that you give me your email address so that I can send you the transcript. If you want to stick around, I will keep talking about a few more things because we're kind of on a roll. All right. So if you want to stick around and talk about more stuff, you can. If you have to leave, we understand. All right. But I just think that it's wrong for teachers to watch the clock. And, as long as everybody's here and they feel like they're getting useful information that's helpful, I'm going to keep going. Now, I asked the school this afternoon what they thought would be a good thing to teach. And they suggested that I talk about the fiduciary duties and agency. And I think the school is absolutely right about that because the two main reasons that brokers get their license taken away in New York State is violations of fair housing law and violations of agency law. So the uh, Department of State wants to be absolutely sure that you understand agency and you understand fair housing. And the best way for them to be sure you understand it is to put it on the test. So the school suggested that I talk a little bit about agency and fiduciary duties. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you, to refresh your memory, I'm going to show you a couple of the slides that we did to refresh your memory about agency and the fiduciary duties. And then I'm going to go for the questions. All right? So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to share my screen with you. Okay. So a principal is going to walk their own dog, clean their own home, and do their own tax returns. Or they could hire a dog walker, a house cleaner, or an accountant. A principal can hire an agent to do things for them, and a principal becomes a client of the agent. By definition, an agent represents someone. The client, which Department of State also calls the principal, is who you represent. How do you know who is the client? It's who you have a contract with. Now, salespersons don't sign contracts with clients, brokers do. So you ask your broker, who do you have a contract with? If you don't know who your client is, ask your broker, who do we have a contract with? Now, the agent owes legal duties to the client, and those are called the fiduciary duties. The customer is the other guy. It's who you do not represent. So, for example, if you work for a tenant, the landlord is the customer. And you only owe one thing to the customer, honesty. You don't owe them anything else. All right. So once again, how do you know who's your client? Your client is whoever your broker has a contract with. Now, contracts can be spoken or written, but I've never seen a broker who allows spoken contracts. They always do written agency contracts. Now, I want to be sure we know what these are called. If it's a seller or a landlord, it's called a listing contract. If it's a buyer or a tenant, it's a representation contract, sometimes called an agency contract. So I'm going to stop the share, and we're going to go to the fiduciary duties. So I'm going to share again, and we're going to go to a different slideshow. Now, do people remember the acronym OLD CAR? Okay, OLD CAR. I took this photo. I took this photo in Toms River, New Jersey. All right, this is an actual old car that I took a photo. Now, we remember the fiduciary duties with the acronym OLD CAR. And you must know for the test what OLD CAR stands for. Obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, accountability, and reasonable care. All right, so let's go through what each of them are. Now, obedience means you follow the client's orders. So if a client tells you, price my home at $6 million or don't show on weekends, as their agent, you must obey. You can argue with them, but in the final analysis, you must obey. But what they will try to trick you about on the test is that you can never obey someone to break the law. Like you can't obey them to violate fair housing. You can't obey them to conceal important information. Like if the seller says, well, there's asbestos in the basement, but don't tell anybody. Like that's totally illegal. If you know that there's asbestos in the house, you have to tell. Okay. Next one, loyalty. Loyalty means putting the client's best interests above your own. So you always have to do what's best for your client, not what is best for you. Loyalty is the one duty that's impossible in dual agency. Dual agency is when you work for both sides in the same deal. So you work for the landlord and the tenant in the same rental. So that means that your broker has a contract with both the landlord and the tenant. Or you work for both the seller and the buyer at the same time in the same sale. So your broker has a contract with both the seller and the buyer. Disclosure means you tell. You are required to tell your client any important information you know about the deal. Confidentiality means you don't tell. In other words, you don't go around telling people private information about your client. Now, here's an example. We have tons of movie stars, rock stars, politicians who live in New York. Like I took this picture of Paul McCartney, right? He owns 3 houses in New York State, in various parts of New York State. We have had 26 presidents live in New York State. Now, 26 presidents were not born in New York State, but 26 presidents have lived in New York State at some point in their lives. So those kind of people, these rich, famous people, if we go around telling confidential information about them, we could put their life in danger. So confidentiality is the only duty that lasts forever. So even after our contract is over, even after they are no longer our client, confidentiality goes on forever. Accountability is not accounting because we're not accountants. It's handling money properly. And you need to know the word commingling. Commingling is illegally mixing money that doesn't belong together, like mixing the landlord's money with the tenant's money in the same bank account, or putting a buyer's security deposit into the broker's bank account. That's mixing people's money that doesn't belong together. It's called commingling, and it's a violation of the duty of accountability. And then the last one, the R in old car, is reasonable care and skill. And reasonable care and skill means that we don't try to do things that we don't have the training for. Like we don't try to give people legal advice or tax advice or architectural advice or something like that. I mean, people are always asking me for legal advice and tax advice because they don't want to pay lawyers and accountants, so they figure they can get free advice from me. And I always have to say the same thing, which is I'm not an attorney. I lack reasonable care and skill. So, for example, I had a friend who was having trouble with his lease. He had a commercial lease and he was having trouble with his landlord. And he asked me for advice. And I said, look, I'm not an attorney. I can't advise you about your lease, but I can share information with you. So I took a real estate book and I photocopied some pages out of the book that had to do with his question and emailed him the pages out of the book. I can do that. I can share public information with him, but I can't give him any advice. I can't give him professional advice. I could lose my license if I did that. All right. So I'm going to stop the share and go to the questions. And I promise you, there are questions about all these. The topics, more principles are agency, housing, and math. Well, I do math because most students find math to be the most difficult. And I do agency and fair housing because those are the things that Department of State loves the most. Okay, so I'm going to give you a few questions about agency and fair housing that we just discussed. Which fiduciary duty would be violated if a broker commingles the money of a principal with the broker's own money? Now, I'm about to give you, as soon as you answer that, I'm about to give you a question from the state test that I think is a really, really weird question. Thank you. Answer is D, accountability. All right, here is a really, really weird question. A listing broker for the seller. Okay, so the seller has an exclusive seller contract, an exclusive listing contract by the seller with the broker. A listing broker for the seller has a buyer who asks to see the listing. This request would be for which one of the following types of agency? So what is the buyer asking for? Well, the buyer can't be asking for exclusive seller agency because they can't ask for something for the seller. They can only ask for themselves, which is the buyer. It can't be general. Okay, let me type this in for you, okay? Because I think this is a really, really weird question. Um, Buyer cannot ask for agency for the seller. So D is wrong. Uh, Salespersons and brokers are special agents, not general agents. So B is wrong. Special agents do one thing for their clients. In our case, market real estate. Exclusive buyer seems to be wrong because the buyer did not mention exclusivity, and also the broker already has agency with the seller. So it sounds like buyer is asking for dual agency. A is correct. Well, look what I had to go through. I had to go through all that, and Kevin got the answer right away. So does that logic make sense to everybody? That it's a request for dual agency? Okay, here's a question that's on every test. I believe it's on the school test also. When is dual agency legal? I'm going to give you choices. When is dual agency legal? Always, never, with oral consent, or with written informed consent of both parties. Thank you. Answer is D. That's always on the test. Good, good, good. Which fiduciary duty is impossible in dual agency? Thank you. Which does the agent not owe to the customer? Which does the agent not owe to the customer? Good faith, honesty, fair dealing, or loyalty? Exactly right. Exactly right. Loyalty. Because we said that loyalty means that the agent puts the client's best interests above their own, Well, we don't put the customer's best interest above their own. The customer is somebody that we don't work for them. We don't even know them. The only thing we owe them is honesty. Okay. This one I think is kind of easy, but it is on both the school and the state test. So I want to be sure everybody knows it. Which one of the following people does the agent always represent in a real estate transaction? Client, buyer, seller, or customer? Absolutely right. Okay, I've got another one for you. Now, I don't actually agree with this answer, but we have to do what Department of State wants, right? Agent Amy is discussing a possible listing when the homeowner tells her that he will not sell to minorities. What should Amy do? A, not take the listing since she and her broker could be liable for violating fair housing laws. B, take the listing and hope that no minorities make an offer. C, take the listing and keep the ethnic background of any potential buyer a secret. Or D, take the listing and obey her client. Okay, well, Peter is absolutely right. The answer is A. And Jennifer put her pinky on the wrong on the wrong key. So Jennifer was going for A, but she got the Q. So answer is A. Now, I would say that she doesn't have to not take the listing. She just says to the person, look, that's illegal. I can't violate the law and you can't violate the law. So we're going to show the property to everybody. Like, why does she have to turn down the listing? Can't she just tell the person we're not going to break the law and then they can proceed with the deal? Do you agree with me? Yeah, like I wouldn't walk away from a deal. I would just educate the person and go, "Well, that's illegal and I'm not going to break the law and you're not going to break the law," and then everybody goes forward. So I think that A is a little extreme. Exactly, they might not be aware. I mean, this actually happened to me. I had a student who called me on the phone and she goes, "Kristen, I'm so excited. I just got a listing on a whole entire apartment building, like 100 apartments." And I go, "That's fantastic." And she goes, "Yeah, but the landlady said she doesn't want me to show the apartment to any apartments to black people." And I go, "Are you insane? She actually said that?" And my student goes, "Yeah. Are you ready for this?" My student says to me, "Isn't there some kind of exception or exemption?" And I go, "Oh my God, my life is a lie." Like, didn't we study that there's no exceptions or exemptions ever to 1866 Civil Rights Act? But now here's the really weird part. This student is black. The landlady said to her face, she goes, "Don't bring any black people to my building." And I said, "Wait a second, why do you want to work with this landlady who's such a jerk?" And she goes, "Well, I don't like her, but I know, right? She goes, "Well, I don't like her, but her money is just as green as everybody else's, and it's hard for me to turn down 100 apartments." And she said, I asked the lady, why are you talking to me that way? And she goes, oh, but you're different. You know, you're not like those other people. Can you imagine? So, um, I said to my student, look, what you have to do is if you want to work with this lady, you have to tell her in no uncertain terms. I suggest you tell her in writing. Like send her a copy of Civil Rights Act and say, look, I just want you to know that you and we're always going to uphold the law together when we do these transactions. You know, I know that you want to uphold the law and we're going to do it together. But, you know, I'm not going to tell a student she can't make all this money if she wants to. You know, I can't tell her how to feel. So, like, you know, can you imagine walking away from the commission on 100 apartments? So that's her decision to make. It's not my decision. I mean, I did say to her, why do you want to work with such a jerk? But so that's why I think that this question is a little judgmental, because as long as she educates her client that what the client is asking for is completely illegal, she should be able to go ahead with the deal if she wants to. All right, getting back. Okay, here's a question that you might see on the test. Now, they will never ask you on the test about the law in any particular city, because they're not going to ask some guy in Buffalo what's the law in New York City, and they're not going to ask some guy in New York City what's the law in Buffalo. They never do that. So both the school test and the state test are for the whole state. All right. So they're going to say which protected class is not covered by New York state law, but may be covered by a specific municipality. So age, lawful occupation, marital status, or sexual orientation. Which one of those is not covered by New York State? Very good. Answer is B. Okay. I think we have pretty much done. Um, I mean, I'm going to ask you one. I'm going to be insulting your intelligence because I know you know the answer to this, but it's always on the test, so I'm going to ask you. What was the first fair housing law in the US? I'm not even going to give you choices because everybody knows this. And then what I want to do before everybody like leaves me is I want to be sure that you know the questions about license law because there's a boatload of questions about that. So what was the first fair housing law in the US? Thank you. Going back to the Civil Rights Act, right? Going back to the Civil War. So definitely 1866. Oh, um, I forgot. Um, I forgot the one question that is always, 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 always on the test. Let me get it for you. And then we'll move on. Persons with disabilities became a protected class under which law? Civil Rights Act of 1866, Civil Rights Act of 1964, Federal Fair Housing Amendments Act of 1988, and Housing and Community Development Act of 1974. What's the answer? This is always, always, always on the test. Did I say always? Okay, so most of the people have it right. The answer is the Fair Housing Act Amendment of 1988. It added disabled people and family status. Family status does not mean marriage. It means kids. Okay. Uh, do people remember what's a brush pass? I don't know what a brush pass is. Okay, it must be some term I'm unaware of. Uh, oh, okay. Um, do people remember my funny way of remembering this? Oh, okay. Do people remember my funny way to remember this law? Here, I'll give it to you. Disabled people? No, George Bush is in the course. So disabled people, wheelchairs. Little kids, strollers. 1988 looks like wheels. So if you can remember the wheelchairs and the strollers, 1988. Okay? Always on the test. All right. What I want to do with you at the moment is I want to go over the questions that you're going to see about who needs a license. They love questions like this. Which one of the following individuals would be exempt from the real estate license requirement? A tenant relocator, an attorney who does not sponsor salespersons, a property manager for several different owners, or a mortgage broker for mortgages other than residential. Thank you. Everybody got it right. That's beautiful. Answer is B. I got another one like this. Okay, they love questions like this. There's always at least one question on the test about who needs a license. Okay. Who does not need a real estate license? An attorney hiring salespersons, a salesperson's website offering property for sale, a manager for many owners, or a person ordered by a court to handle foreclosure. Well, if you don't have a license, you can't make a website, right? So it's got to be D. Answer is D. Yes. Answer is D. Anyone appointed by court does not need real estate license. Now, I'm really surprised because usually these questions about who needs a license and who doesn't, usually students have trouble with that. And it seems like everybody understands it. Does everybody feel like they understand it? Or do you want me to include some information about it in the transcript? because I can. Well, while I'm waiting for you to tell me if you want me to include information, I'm going to give you one last question. And the reason I'm going to give you this last question is because I think it's funny. This question is always on the state test. And when you go to take the state test, you are going to see, okay, good. You are going to see Mrs. Davis and you're going to think of me. Mrs. Davis purchased a property and was granted the right to cross the adjacent driveway to reach a beach. Mrs. Davis has been given a variance, an encroachment, an easement in gross, or an easement appurtenant. What does she have? Thank you. Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, now what I have to do at the end of the class is I have to do a couple of administrative things that I always forget to do. And the one thing I forget to do is I always forget to tell you that the school has a textbook. We do not make, RELNY does not make anybody buy anything. Okay, which is what I like about this school. Like some schools that I teach for, they make you buy a textbook. RELNY does not make you buy a textbook. If you want the information written, you can download transcripts for free. All right. So we don't make you buy anything, but if you want a textbook, they do sell a textbook. Okay. Now I wrote this textbook and I always put a picture of my stupid little self on the front of my books because people might forget, they might forget my name, but they might remember what I look like. So I always put a picture of myself. And this has all the information that's in the course, but it also has about 50% more information. And I'm not sure how much it costs, but I think it's pretty cheap. I mean, I'm not the one who sells it. Booksellers buy it from the publisher and sell it on Amazon. So maybe you can sell it for, buy it from RELNY too. I'm not even sure. But anyway, RELNY asked me if I would mention that they do have a textbook because apparently people ask about it. So that's the last thing I want to say. Does anybody have anything that you want to say to me? I'm just going to be quiet for a minute in case anybody wants to say anything. Oh, that's very nice. He says thank you. Okay, everybody gave me your email so that I can send you the transcript. I think some people gave it to me a bunch of times to be sure, absolutely sure. I will give you, well, you can always get my email from the school, but my email is simply chrisbacorn@gmail. So if you ever need to reach me, I'm pretty gosh darn easy to find. Okay, I'm reading the new messages. Okay, good. Can I add some bonus questions and answers? Yeah, I'm actually what I'm gonna do, Jennifer, is I'm not gonna put in more questions and answers. What I'm gonna do is put in bonus material. Like I'm gonna put in some extra definitions and stuff like that. But I am gonna put in some bonus material and I'm also going to answer the question that was raised about percentage rent. Oh, really? Thank you. I'm so glad. I'm glad that it went well for people. Okay, and if you ever have any questions about anything, I'm always sitting around. So you can always contact me. Um, okay, there's little old me. And can you say goodnight to my dog? That's Boney Maroney. She normally is extremely energetic, but she has learned, she's figured out when I'm teaching and when I'm not. So she knows that when I'm teaching, she's supposed to be quiet. So she's normally much more energetic than this. So that's my little Boney Maroney that I talk about sometimes. All right, I think we're done then. So, um, Good night, everybody, and you will receive your transcript from me. You got to give me a little bit of time to edit it and everything. All right, but you will receive it from me in a little while. Do you take the tutoring class before the school exam or before the state? Well, that's kind of up to you. Oh, you know what I should mention is has anybody used the exam readiness meter? RELNY has this thing in your account. It's called the exam readiness meter, and it tells you if you were going to take the test, the school test today, what you would probably score. And it's been very, very accurate. So the more that you study and the more that you retake the lecture tests, the higher your exam readiness meter goes. And that lets you know when you're ready to take the school test and the state test. And it's been very accurate so far. So, the tutoring class, you could take it before either one, like whenever you feel like you would benefit from it. Like at the beginning of the class, I was saying that, I don't care when you take the stuff. You need to learn it sometime, whether you can learn it at the beginning, you can learn it at the end, you can learn it at the middle, as long as you learn it, doesn't matter when. Oh, thank you. See, Lucian, you're going to do really, really well then. If your exam readiness meter is telling you like 87, that's pretty gosh darn good because um to pass the school test, you only need to pass with a 65. So you got it made. Okay, good night, everyone. All right. I'm gonna get going then. Thank you for being with me this evening. All right. And I'll see everybody soon, I hope.